our party has had their first session in Betrayer's Rise, and we're going to talk about what happened. So let's dig in. Welcome back, everybody. So my party is finally in Betrayer's Rise, and things are crazy. So before we dive into exactly what happened, let's talk about what went well. The very first thing I think that went well is my party was nervous as they were going through the dungeon for the first part of that they went through anyway. I feel like I did a good job of describing to them the dangers that they may face. So they're very cautious as they're going throughout the Betrayer's Rise, which I think is good. What could be better? I feel like they haven't been challenged enough physically yet. So right now, all they have done is fought the gibbering mouthers, and the fight went okay. They kind of kited them back into the other area, so they were able to pick them off one at a time because the gibbering mouthers move so slowly. So I may add another encounter to challenge them a little bit in this next session. We'll kind of see how it goes. I'll have one prepped just in case, and we may add it or we may not, just depending on how the party's doing. Let's talk about what actually happened in Betrayer's Rise. We were missing one of our players, which is totally okay. Trixie tested positive for COVID, so she was out this session, and she should be there for our next session, which is totally fine. I mean, she's doing okay and is healthy, so that's good. We closed the doors and described the room, and they spent some time getting their bearings a little bit. Everyone happened to have dark vision, so everything there was good. They noticed around the room. They noticed the symbol to Avandra, and they all pretty much could guess that it was Avandra, but they had rolled to make sure that that was the case. And they're like, well, what hates Avandra so much in here? And so there's some conversation that kind of bounced back and forth, and obviously they came to the conclusion that, hey, this is the Betrayer God's place, and they don't really like the Prime Deities. So anyway, Iris eventually decided, well, all right, enough talking, let's start going in. As she walked closer, she's the one that holds the Jewel of Three Pairs. She started noticing the pulsing red light from the door, and she felt it get warm on her person. And they were like, whoa, that's cool. And they're like, okay. So they tentatively touched the door, and it just swung open. And they looked inside very cautiously and made their way into the next room, where we describe again, straight out of the book, scenes of battle, and they can hear snoring sounds. And like, what the heck is all that? And they're checking out the holes, worried. They were terrified that all the holes in the wall were for like poison darts or something like that, but then all of a sudden this nasty sludge comes creeping through, and they're like, oh crap. I have one player who's been around D&D for a long time, and they're like, oh, that's going to be some sort of gelatinous cube type thing, but it ended up being the more gibbering mouthers, and so they fought them. They kind of kited them. They blew through the one that's kind of blocking the back door. Everybody just kind of ran past, took their opportunity attacks. It was fine, and they just kind of stood at the doorway, waiting for one or another to get back. And because the gibbering mouthers only have 10 feet of movement speed, it took them a while to get around and into the room. So they were able to take them out a little bit. They did do some damage, and a couple of my players were blinded from the little spittle that they shoot. But overall, not terrible as far as battles go. After that, they're like, holy crap, this place is freaky. They went into the next room, and they took a long time in here. And I'm totally okay if my party wants to sit and talk and plan and strategize. I only have one member of my party who speaks Abyssal, and that's Jimmy. So I had Jimmy notice on the wall, there's some writing. I just texted, in Discord on my phone, pulled open the text and sent it to him, and had him decide whether or not he was going to reveal the fact that he knew Abyssal and what it said to the rest of the party. And he decided he wasn't going to. He just said, hey guys, we should probably stay away from that weird wall over there. Then they did some more searching on the vase and the table. Again, there's some little carvings in Abyssal, and Jimmy was able to read it, and he's like, okay, well, I think we should put something valuable in here. And eventually they got enough valuable stuff in there that they rotted away, and the passage behind the table opened. While all this was going on, they were inspecting the other alcoves, checking for secret doors and things, and nobody obviously found anything other than there's the caved-in area. Iris spent some time digging through that while the rest of the party kind of took a short rest. They had some bumps and bruises that they wanted to heal up, so they did all that. Iris eventually clears that all out as they're finishing up their short rest, and she goes down the hallway a little bit, hears the clattering and sort of faint music, and they're like, well, maybe let's not go that way. Let's go back up north, where they enter the room with the stained glass window. As they approach, the dancing flames come to life, and they start dancing. My whole party is like, what is going on here? So I have them roll an insight check, and they get the impression, they rolled really well, they got the impression that they wanted them to dance. So they started, various different members of my party started doing various dances. I think Jimmy started doing rolls, and they were doing all sorts of interpretive dancing and whatnot, which was a lot of fun, and they all actually did really well on their checks. So they got to see the flames go up to the stained glass mirror, touched the appropriate sign for whichever one was next in line, and so they each went and touched them, and then my party was like, oh, that's weird. They were here for a good long time trying to decide, well, do we go through the other doors? They checked to see if they were locked and trapped, and they weren't. And they're like, well, okay, over there, we don't know what's over there. Do we go back and fight the spiders? Long time talking. So eventually I just said, Question, who I decided was going to be with them because I want her to give them the motivation to go to Ank'Harel, and I feel like if she stayed back, they wouldn't trust her anymore. So I have her with them, and she's just kind of sitting in the back, not really participating in the battles because she is a scholar and is pretty much terrified in here the entire time. So I had her say, oh, by the way, here's something that I have on the betrayer gods. So I handed them a little packet, kind of give them some information on the betrayer gods and whatnot. And then my party was like, oh, okay, well, these are obviously the symbols for the betrayer gods. There's 9 of them. That makes sense. Then they're like, okay, let's keep dancing and see what the flames do. And so they danced again, and they watched them in order, and then Jimmy's mind goes, maybe we have to touch them in the right order. Jimmy ends up touching them in the right order, or the stained glass window creaks open, and they're able to pass through if they want. However, not everybody in my party wanted to go through immediately. They're like, well, this is trapped, this is freaky, whatever else. Are we doing this correctly? They're all nervous. So Jimmy and Chozen eventually decide to go through, and in this next hallway, it's just a long hallway with a giant circular hole that leads down to the statues in the floor below. Inside of this, there are just depictions all along the walls of people basically being tortured, and on the ground there are these chains. Well, you go in and you have to make a wisdom save. Jimmy made it, Chozen didn't. If you fail, you have to start groveling on your knees, and when you do so, the chains start to come and get you, and you have to make a dex save. So Jimmy, I think 3 times, failed the wisdom save, but saved on the dex. Eventually, they're like, okay, this place is really spooky. Jimmy gets close to the hole in the ground and kind of looks down, and he can start to hear wailing very distantly coming up from the hole. Freaks him out. So they're like, okay, well, let's take care of these chains. So Jimmy decides, all right, well, this is creepy. Let's back out and talk about it. So in the meantime, let's grab these chains. So he grabs them and takes a bunch of psychic damage and wraps them up with a rope. Then they all go out, they pull the rope as far as they can into the other room, and I made it so that the chains actually couldn't penetrate where the stained glass was, so they were stuck inside the hallway. So my party took their that rope there, tied all the chains together as taut as they could, and pulled it and tried to tie it to one of the nearest pillars. It was just long enough that they could do all of that. Then they're like, okay, well, now what do we do? Again, more talking, more conversing, and that's totally fine with me. Some people can get a little bit bored, but I think it's a great part of D&D is the planning aspect, and then we watch it all unravel as is normal. They decided that they were going to use their remaining ropes. I think they used 3 more ropes that they had in their bags, tied them all together, tied them to the pillar, and put it down the hole in the end of the hallway. So they go down. They decide, all right, after much back and forth. Dmitri was adamant that they shouldn't go down this hole because of the wailing. They decide, all right, we're just going to do it. Should we have someone go scout? Whatever, blah, 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 back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. All these different plans. And eventually they decide, all right, we're all just going to go. So they all go down and they land on the hand. And they take a look around and can kind of see, but their dark vision only goes 60 feet. They can see these hands kind of coming up out of the darkness, and they can see some of the things on the walls. They can see the statue of this man kneeling in the center, and they're like, whoa, this is freaky. They decide they're going to climb down the rest of the arm, and they get down and can see the room. So we describe the room. There's pustules on the bottom in the palms of the hands. There's a door, iron doors in the chest of this statue, and then there's a couple different openings around the room, and that is where we ended our session. It took a lot longer for them to traverse through than I thought it would. They've covered 4 rooms, I think, in the dungeon in a 3-hour session. So definitely being cautious, which is good, but I also want to challenge them a little bit and see if we can't give them a little bit something else to worry about besides just the effects of Betrayer's Rise, which is definitely playing with their minds and is good. So highly, highly recommend this dungeon. It's been a lot of fun to watch and to prep for and to watch them go through. So, and I think my players are having a really good time as well. But that's pretty much all I've got today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. We'll catch you in the next one.